Good evening. A very warm welcome to the Digital Körber Forum. My name is Gabriele Wojdelko, and I'm responsible for the Division of History and Politics at the Körber Foundation. I'm pleased to see that so many of you have joined digitally. Tomorrow it will be 30 years since the three heads of government of the former Soviet republics of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine met in a hunting chateau at the Belarusian-Polish border region to decide on the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Together they conceived an agreement at a place where today refugees hold out in the woods close to the Polish border to await their entry into the European Union. Well, the end of the Soviet Union makes itself felt, unfortunately, in the form of negative headlines about confrontations, conflicts, threat scenarios, or just recently with the deployment of Russian troops along the border to Ukraine, but also in the form of the imminent closure of our Russian partner organization, Memorial International, a non-governmental organization that has advocated the reappraisal of the Soviet past since the end of the 1980s and the protection of civil rights and human rights. The developments in Russia and the territories of the former Soviet Union concern us all until this day. That is why we invite you to take a differentiated view within a digital journey, a view towards the East from a civil societal perspective, and to, well, embark on this journey together to discuss the Soviet legacies after the downfall of the Soviet Empire. True to the motto of our founder Körber, to talk with each other, not about each other. And that brings us to today's guests. I am pleased to be able to benefit from Professor Sasse's extensive experience. She is the director at the ZOIS, the Center for East European and International Studies, but she is also an Einstein professor for comparative democracy and authoritarianism studies at the Humboldt University in Berlin. A very warm welcome to you, Ms. Sasse. It's great to have you. The Körber Foundation, ZOIS, and the Friedrich Ebert Foundation Moscow teamed up to look back at a joint project where, during the past few weeks, we have brought together digitally young people from former Soviet countries and the Warsaw Pact. Of course, we abided by COVID-19 regulations. We brought them together in a safe environment because we wanted to find out how this young generation perceives the consequences of their shared European experience with socialism and the Cold War 30 years later. The participants from this project cannot be here today, but three of them will join us digitally. They come from Russia, Kyrgyzstan, and Serbia. I want to thank all the participants of the ZOIS, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and especially the ZOIS organization for this very fruitful cooperation during the last few months. It was a great project, and now, without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to my colleague Katja Fauser. Here at the Körber Foundation, she's responsible for the European Network program U-Story, and she will also be the host of today's event. And a remark on our language setup: we will have a German stream which is interpreted. If you want to listen to the English version, please go to our YouTube channel, or the ZOIS YouTube channel, that is. If you want to know why we really need to discuss the East more often, and if you want to know why we need to understand our European presence better, then you have come to the right place. Stay here, stay tuned, and if you want to know more about the project that I just explained to you, mark the hashtag 30 post-Soviet years, or check out our website for more information. Well, with that said, I will pass the floor to my colleague, Katja Fausser. Thank you so much, Gabi, and I would also like to welcome you. Well, you just heard it. Today, we would like to take you on a digital journey into the post-Soviet area. Well, we had different plans for tonight's event, but the pandemic thwarted our plans, which is no news, unfortunately. We had to adjust our format and we tried out something different today. So I have to slip into the moderator role, but also the role of a travel companion. But there is someone to accompany me on my journey. It is Professor Sasse. A very warm welcome to Gwendolyn Sasse. And I heard that you're in Berlin right now. I'm so glad to be here. Ms. Sasse, you and your co-workers at your institute have made themselves heard for the last few months. They have shed light on the legacy of the former Soviet Union, socialism, and the Cold War from different perspectives. And what's so special is that you go beyond this area and you collect different perspectives. You shed light on the different perspectives and you explain them to us. Before we dive into this topic more deeply, I would like to explain that digital journey to you and introduce our itinerary to you. And we have prepared a short video clip. So we hope that this little animation along that journey could explain to you what we would travel if we were to take that journey literally. It would take 14 days for us to travel along that itinerary. It's a huge area, a gigantic sphere which is rich in history, encompassing many different countries. And now we can only shed light on some aspects, some countries, but we hope that this will make you want to engage more with that field. Ms. Sasse, my first question to you. Ms. Wojdelko said it before, tomorrow marks the end of the Soviet Union. This happened 30 years ago. This empire came to an end. How was it like back then, and what kind of challenges are still visible today? Well, we could derive significant challenges from what happened back then. Challenges for the new independent states that formed after the downfall of the Soviet Union, but the entire socialist area. If we take a look at the young generation and we will listen to some of their stories, and if we compare it to the 30 years, there is a stark contrast. But we will really have to remember what happened 30 years ago, how it developed, how it came about, and that in a relatively short time span, the Soviet Union collapsed, even though it seemed to be very robust, very stable. And everything happened in a breathtaking pace after Mikhail Gorbachev. And then we had the coup d'etat in summer of 1991, in August that was. This disintegration was unstoppable. Gorbachev tried to preserve part of the Soviet Union under different circumstances, but due to the 1991 coup d'etat, this option failed. And then everything evolved quickly. It was winter 1991, a very important date. You mentioned the 8th of December, which marks the end of the Soviet Union. And then we had the 1st of December 1991, where we had the Ukrainian referendum of independence, and other developments that are very important. But after that coup d'etat in summer of 1991, many states declared their independence, also Ukraine. And in Ukraine, they made the development legitimate because of that referendum where a huge majority said that they wanted to be independent, and then the disintegration couldn't be stopped anymore. But of course, this brought along huge challenges. Many states wanted to declare independence, but this is, of course, legally complicated. It needs support from the people living there, from the elites. Countries needed to restructure themselves internationally. They needed to become visible on the international stage. They needed to establish themselves. There are countries, for instance, the Ukraine, that have fought for their independence, and they have fought to be seen as an independent state by Russia. We had the situation in the Donbas region in 2014. Now we have the deployment of Russian troops along the border to Ukraine. So we have all these different developments. We speak of a dilemma of parallelism, where you have all these different developments taking place at the same time. We see many different political transformational processes towards democracy, but also towards authoritarianism. And of course, we need to factor in economic factors too, which are important for the population. So the early post-Soviet Union is remembered as a bad area by many populations, by many people. Difficulties such as inflation, economic despair, people bring that together with that transformation, or other connections where states weren't yet organized on a state level, other structural intricacies that made the development difficult for the states, supply of energy, dependencies on other markets, supply chains, you name it. And these challenges are still visible in that region. You just mentioned the situation in Ukraine or in the Donbas region. We prepared another map for you that we would like to show you, just so you get a feeling of the dimension of the region and the countries. And you also see the different places or regions where you find those frozen conflicts. Here you see a map of the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Pact of 1980. And you see how vast this region was. And then we had all those transformations, the entanglements between the different countries. And I know that you don't like that term, but you just talked about Ukraine. Well, these frozen conflicts are, of course, something we should discuss. where can borders, national borders, run? And we have seen larger conflicts since the downfall of the Soviet Union, and we just saw that map of that vast region. It's a huge area. Before we talk about the biggest post-Soviet country, Russia, I would first like to ask you the following question. Is the Ukraine the most pressing problem if we take a look at the headlines, if we watch the news? Is this the most pressing topic that we would have to deal with? Or are there underlying, less visible problems that are equally relevant and that need to be discussed and solved, that we need to deal with? Maybe it's not the most, the loudest problem that needs to be tackled first. What's your take on that?
Well, nowadays, of course, we see those urgent topics, and they are important topics, and there is no simple solution, be it on the international level or the national level. Ukraine and Russia, this is one important issue. And another important issue, which is also in the headlines and also in the political sphere, is the refugee crisis at the Belarusian and Russian border. After 1 year of mass mobilization against Alexander Lukashenko, who actually launched many different Soviet structures and kept Soviet structures in the country. Well, there is a lot of pressure on the regime. And now there is the European Union and the West fighting him, or he is fighting the EU and the West, and he uses refugees as a means to exert pressure. And we can see this in the everyday news. This is an important issue as well. But there are also many other very important problems. And there are many different personalities, especially the Russian president, who is always visible in the media, and that is why I like this round trip today very much, because it's always about the people, it's about each and every individual. It's not just about the Soviet Union and what came afterwards. There are also many generations who don't remember this time, and it's still a challenge for these people. And we don't see these problems, we don't see the diversity. We just call it the East or a post-Soviet space. I don't know for how long we can keep naming it like that. Those are people with real problems. And it is a round trip today. And I heard the sound. It is actually a round trip by train, and we see new regions. We see regions of the post-Soviet area, and this is also new for many people in the West. So from the West to the East, this is something that we have to do much more. We have to take a look what's going on. We haven't achieved that yet, and we should actually have more of these round trips. So it's not just these topics that we read in the media, those negative topics, which are important. Those are, of course, always crises people are talking about. I just mentioned 2 crises, but there are also other social topics, civil society topics, and things which are not too different to our situation, but we just always think that they live in a different world. The East always has connotations that it's associated with one bloc, one group, the East. I think 1 week ago, the US Minister of Defense said that he was afraid that Ukraine would invade the European Union. Of course, that was a slip of the tongue. It was a mistake, but you can already see the problem. And later it was said, thank you very much for the insight into the Soviet Republic of Tuva. So you can really see that people are do not have a lot of knowledge about this. It's a very undifferentiated view, and it's still a view which is 30 years old. Yeah, thank you very much. This is why we have this round trip. We want to raise awareness, awaken interest, and this is how we want to do that. We will take a look at mental and also physical legacies from the Soviet era in those countries, and we want to talk to young people. The background to this idea was that we wanted to talk to the young generation from Russia, Kyrgyzstan, and Belgrade, Serbia. And we have actually been cooperating with these young people for quite some time during this youth project. And yeah, we would like to get started with that right now. We would like to give those young voices a stage. So let's get started with our round trip. We start in Hamburg and we go to Moscow. We meet Maria Mizanaya. She's 21 years old, a literature student. She lives in Moscow. And what we are going to see are visual pictures, photographs she has taken during this project. She took pictures of images from the Soviet era, and those are things that are important to her. I would suggest that we just go to Russia, and then later we have the opportunity to talk to Maria.
Herzlich willkommen, Maria.
Welcome, Maria. Thank you so much for being with us today and to be willing to share those pictures with us, to make them available to us today, and to get to know you and the pictures a little bit more. The pictures that we've seen are actually part of a bigger series of pictures. We have seen a metro station, we have seen a picture of the university, and we would like to talk about two pictures today. And as I said, all the other pictures are also available on the internet, and you can also take a look at the other pictures later on. The first photo is from the part of the town where you grew up. Please explain what we see there and what you associate with this photo. Why is that important? Why did you select this picture?
Okay, so on the picture you can see a house in the district of North Chertanova, and this is where I grew up basically, and this was a district that was built in the 1970s, and at the time it was considered to be a very experimental piece of architecture, so the district was meant to be self-sufficient, entirely new, fresh, exciting, and Moscow has never seen anything like that before. So it was a first experience for the Soviet architects to try and build something like that. And now it's kind of not as fresh, obviously, not as exciting. And for some time it has been not entirely abandoned, but obviously it wasn't seen as new and surprising as it was used to, so in the 70s. But then what happened next is in the 2010s, the district started to become very fashionable again, and it was, in a sense, rediscovered by various content creators, artists. So many films were shot there, many photo shoots. So fashion magazines used the district to introduce the fashion collections and things like that. And I personally used to spend a lot of time in that district. So we would go there with my friends and spend some time, drink some coffee, try to climb those weird constructions that you can see here. And when I came back there to take a picture for the project, I actually discovered that the district is very alive and well, in a sense. So I tried to capture this moment where the two kids were playing on this weird piece of construction. And to me, it meant that, well, the Soviet past is not entirely past. So even though it's not seen as innovative anymore, it's still alive and it's still being used by the citizens. So yeah, that was what I was trying to convey, I guess, to the picture.
Mhm. Ja, vielen Dank dafür.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't know what the others think, but I see this picture completely differently now after you explained what it means to you. So thank you very much for this explanation and the background information on this picture. And we would also like to show a second picture. The second picture is a scene from a cafe in Moscow. And we see famous personalities, Stalin, Che Guevara. I don't know about the other pictures, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about this place. What do we see here? And again, the question, why have you selected this picture and what do you associate with it?
All right, so this cafe is actually situated in the center of the city and in a rather liberal neighborhood. So it was pretty surprising for me to find out that there's something so entirely Soviet in the neighborhood where the universities are. So it's not a very usual thing to come across, I guess. And when I came in, I was absolutely stunned by the amount of this Soviet aesthetic elements that were compressed into this relatively small space. And to me, two things, I guess, stood out the most. First being the commercialization of the Soviet aesthetics and culture. So Soviet cuisine and Soviet posters, Stalin's picture on the wall, obviously, as you can see. It is all being made into something to be sold. So that was very interesting. So you can pay and just get that Soviet experience for the modest amount of 500 rubles, let's say. And another thing that was very surprising to me is how popular this place actually is. So in the evenings, it's usually absolutely filled with people. So it's a struggle even to find a table to sit down at. And those people vary in age actually greatly. So you could meet people of my age, students that come here after probably a day of studying at the university. And you could see people from the generation of my parents, let's say, just being in a friendly meeting with each other, discussing some business stuff, ironically. And also the older generation that has usually a very nostalgic look on their face when they enter the cafe. So everyone is coexisting in the space, and it's very interesting to observe. And it's a very harmonious picture, surprisingly. So yeah, I was very fascinated by that. And I tried to capture those different people just enjoying their time at this peculiar space.
Ja, vielen Dank dafür. Sie selber haben ja
Thank you so much for this.
nicht mehr erlebt.
You actually didn't experience the Soviet Union yourself, but you referred to this feeling of nostalgia, the older generation going there, they're nostalgic and maybe they want to travel back and they want to remember the past. Does this also reflect your feeling in your life, or is this a foreign world to you? Is it still very present for you in your everyday life? Is the Soviet Union very present in your everyday life?
I would say that the Soviet Union is actually very present in my life, especially when you pay closer attention to it, as I did during the project. But I wouldn't necessarily say that I experienced any nostalgia to it, because I don't think if you could say that you experience nostalgia towards something you have never actually experienced firsthand. I can observe it in my grandparents' generation, for example, and specifically in my grandparents. I myself don't feel that way, but what I feel instead is this, I'd say, loving interest in what my loved ones and the people I live with, what they have experienced and what they are experiencing now towards this historic period of my country. So for me, it's not maybe entirely as personal, but I'm very interested in it, very emotionally invested into it, I would even say. So yeah, I observe this nostalgia, I guess, on a daily basis, and this is something very curious for me.
Okay, Maria, ganz herzlichen Dank, dass Sie.
All right, thank you very much, Maria. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for sharing these two pictures with us and explaining them to us. As I said, there are more pictures on the internet. Thank you very much to Moscow. And now I would like to refer to Ms. Sasse, the topic of nostalgia and the heroes from the Soviet Union which were depicted here. How dynamically has the perception of the Soviet Union changed over the past 30 years?
That's a big question, and it, of course, depends on whom you ask. Who's the person to conjure up a certain picture or image of the Soviet Union? It's a very impressive picture, the picture of the cafe, because you see how remembering is filled with life. And I saw the Soviet Union with my own eyes, and I can tell you that no cafe looked like that. It wasn't as colorful, with all these nice pictures depicting different persons from the political community. There might have been one person hanging on the wall. So this is a very colorful cafe telling us stories about selective remembering. And Maria talked about the different groups of people who go there, and I would like to know why they go there. Is this just a cafe to meet people, or do they go there because it's a very special cafe? It really makes me think why people would go there to remember a past life, or if it really reflects the life as it truly was 30 years back. I don't think so. It's an image of nostalgia, but I'm not sure whether nostalgia is the right term, because it has a negative connotation. We also use the term nostalgia in Germany when people like to go back to the past GDR. But that feeling of nostalgia tends to ignore political aspects. Here you can see Stalin hanging on the wall, and that, of course, says a lot about the current political context and how history is approached in Russia by Putin, for instance. It evolves around itself. We talked about the non-governmental organization, Memorial International, that might need to close soon. And it's, of course, a very important organization documenting different histories. And the other institute, Nevada, asks Russian people about different things, persons I remember from the past, other political aspects that I would like to shed light on. And of course, there are different institutions who discuss post-World War developments. But this year and last year, I think the last survey was done in June of 2020, and I believe more than 50% say that when they talk about post-Soviet developments, people tend to ignore the negative developments, the death camps, everything that happened under Stalin. But now, going back to this picture of the cafe, this might only be one aspect. Thank you so much. I said it in the beginning that we can only talk about certain aspects. We cannot discuss these aspects comprehensively. I mean, we could do that for hours on end. But today, we don't have time to do that, unfortunately. So this was our journey to Russia, but now we would like to continue our journey, leaving Moscow, going to Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, which is the easternmost former Soviet republic. Since 1991, it's been an independent state. Now we will meet Lilit Dabagian. She is a media scientist, and she's one of the people responsible for the youth project. She brought along some insights into Bishkek. So let's continue our journey. Lilit, a very warm welcome to you too. It's great to have you here. You brought us different pictures, and one picture depicts a huge behemoth, a statue of Lenin, which we can see in Bishkek. And then we heard the anthem of the old Kyrgyz Soviet Republic. And we also saw a mosaic depicting the friendship of tribes in Kyrgyzstan. I believe this statue is the last of its kind in Central Asia, right? So maybe you can tell us about the history of this statue. I believe it has seen a lot. And please tell us why you selected this picture.
Thanks a lot, Katya. And I just wanted to say, hopefully, the video was perceived more or less ironic, and the fact that there was such a grandiose music and pictures at the beginning was also perceived ironic. The picture of Lenin, unlike many other countries, like at the end of the 80s and the beginning of 1991. Kyrgyzstan was one of the few countries which didn't witness huge protests for national independence. And it was rather a surprise, like that collapse Soviet Union happened. Lenin was still standing there throughout the 90s and even in 2001. Remember, it was a very surreal picture of the Independence Day. People were dancing in folk ethnic costumes, and then the background, you saw Lenin standing and still showing the beautiful, the bright way to communism, which was, I thought, very interesting. But in 2002, it suddenly disappeared from the central square, and instead there were two other, like first it was the Statue of Independence, which was put instead, and then after this, the statue of the epic hero Manas was put instead of this independence statue. But unlike these two statues, which were kind of not very about which it was not sure whether they will stay longer or not, Lenin was still very stable figure, as he was put just behind the main square. So he was basically moved 100 meters behind the square. It seems like I was also reading and trying to understand what actually this means, this weird ensemble between Lenin and behind the square and let's say the national or ethno-national even statues in front of the square. On one hand, one can read this as a weird tension between which way to choose. On the other hand, I also read that it's sort of an interaction and kind of a symbol of continuity between, let's say, internationalism, which is manifested by Lenin, and by Kyrgyz ethno-nationalism, as a statue of Manas symbolizes it. So I guess this is what was interesting still to me. And yeah, it's not so common, I guess, to have Lenin still standing in the heart of, in the center of the capital in many other post-Soviet countries, I guess.
Ja, vielen Dank, Lilith. Und du hast ja auch, die Fotos haben wir eben schon gesehen.
We just saw the pictures. You took the pictures yourself, and you also brought along different pictures of other neighborhoods. And they seem to be a little gloomy at first glance, but you just said it yourself. You also see it a little ironically. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the pictures and to what extent they reflect that attitude towards life. Is it a little gray in Kyrgyzstan? What do you think?
Actually, it's normally very sunny in Kyrgyzstan, but this was okay. It was not an exceptional day, but yeah, normally if you go to Kyrgyzstan, it's quite sunny. But what I thought initially, like if you paid attention to the writings in each of these pictures, like winter is coming, green spaces, don't ruin them, or like don't sneak the glue, or you will have severe punishment if you do. I think what I thought, it was just, yeah, I mean, of course, there is some dramatic touch in all of these pictures, but I also thought that there is some sort of an interplay between the kind of comic writing and the surrounding. So the surroundings looks very kind of gloomy, but this kind of writing is like winter is coming, sounds kind of funny, I think, but of course also has some dramatic also context, because actually if you know the Game of Thrones, it's sort of a threat. And indeed, it means the threat in Kyrgyz context, because Bishkek is one of their polluted cities, and especially in winter. And as you see, this writing was in a central pipe, a central heating pipe of the central heating. And yeah, it is connected, smoke is connected to this. So I wanted to maybe show that sort of the comical side, but which is not so comical if you don't know if you even know the context, I guess. Just important to know that Bishkek is very, very is a very typical socialist or post-socialist city. It was built from the scratch, and basically it's a very dull task for a photographer to search for Soviet materiality in it. And I was thinking to actually capture something which has the surrounding Soviet materiality, but something which was brought by other times, like this glue. I think like don't sniff the glue. I think it's more refers to the 90s, when it was actually a big thing, turbulent 90s, and kind of this thing. So I hope I managed to answer the question. Just let me know if there's any clarifications that I missed.
Nein, ganz herzlichen Dank.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Vielleicht kann ich einmal noch den Blick wenden, weil
maybe we can discuss something else now.
Sie ja nicht nur als junge Frau aus Kirgisistan hier haben, sondern Sie haben
We didn't only invite you as a woman from Kyrgyzstan, but also as someone who's responsible for a youth project. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. For many weeks or months even, you have met people from 14 different, mainly post-Soviet, post-socialist countries, and you have worked with them. Can you tell us if there was one topic that you had to deal with for a longer period of time because it was rather surprising to you? Maybe you can tell us a bit about that experience. What happens if so many people from so many different countries come together, and what can be created?
Oh, that's a very tough question, because indeed there were many topics which I found very interesting. It was something that I was also thinking a lot about. We had participants, for example, one of them was from Ukraine, and we only used one of her photos, unfortunately, but the descriptions was quite interesting, that she said like about decommunization, that in Ukraine, right, there is also a law that you should not put any communist signs, and Gwendolyn, I think, knows better than even me, and basically the names or maybe the streets are being renamed. And she sent a picture of from the subway station, which was called after Yuri Gagarin. And unlike other places, it was interesting that it was disassociated with the Soviet experience. And I found it very interesting also with a case which was rather different with the participant from Czech Republic. She also said the same, and I think for many countries it is like this. There is a sort of a trend of course, of decommunization, but at the same time, some parts of this experience is being kind of dissociated with this past. And I'm wondering, where is the line, where you can draw this, okay, this is the good past and this is something else, it's not related at all to this experience. And maybe actually by trying to answer this question quite with all honesty, maybe you cannot say that you can just easily dissociate it. And maybe that would help us to find a better way, or maybe a sober way, to reflect on what it was, this socialist experience. And also I found it very, very fruitful that we had not only participants from the former Soviet Union, but also, for example, from Yugoslavia, from, Czech Republic, of course, Bulgaria and other countries, because I think it's not right to monopolize this experience by saying, okay, this was only like the Soviet experience is the only experience that existed. And I remember we had also this conversation with Maria and Peter, Maria, former speaker, and Peter will be our probably next speaker from Serbia. And for us, Maria and me, we were thinking about Soviet Union. We were thinking, oh, it was a great, we imagined immediately these great pictures, like maybe the ones that you see in my photos now. But Peter, it was quite different. The way he imagined Yugoslavia was something different. Maybe he can later on comment on this. It would be also interesting to see what was the difference, I think.
Mhm. Ja, vielen Dank und das werden wir in der Tat auch noch tun. Also wir werden ja auch noch,
Thank you very much. We will do that because we will also travel to Serbia later. But first, thank you so much, Lilith, for the cooperation, and thank you for being with us tonight. And now, Ms. Sasse, the generation of Lilith has not only experienced peaceful transformations. There was the revolution in 2005 and violent riots in 2010, where there was a change of government. How optimistic are you? I think there is a new referendum where the power of the parliament is to be strengthened. But how optimistic are you? Is the democracy strong in Kyrgyzstan? It is a rather young state, which was only formed after the end of the Soviet Union. Well, I think the last
eben auch betont, dass
Lilith also mentioned that Kyrgyzstan and the other states of Central Asia are creations of the Soviet Union. And Kyrgyzstan actually declared itself independent before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. However, there was not such a big independence movement. We heard about it. And other Central Asian countries haven't declared their independence, and then they just became independent. So it's a completely different starting point. And Kyrgyzstan, well, was actually considered to be an island of democracy also during the 90s compared to other Central Asian states. But that was rather a transitional phase where different institutions actually had to establish themselves. I don't think that Kyrgyzstan is now considered to be the role model democracy, but it's not what's important right now. It would be not realistic to expect all the countries to turn out to become democracies, and that after just 30 years of time. But Kyrgyzstan actually shows the ambivalent nature of what's going on in Central Asia. There have been so many protests, there have been violent riots, conflicts also at the border to Uzbekistan, and also conflicts with the minority from Uzbekistan. The north and the south are developed differently. This leads to economic conflicts and huge potential for conflicts. And over the past few years, there have been attempts to change the constitution. There have been referendums in order to strengthen the power of the president. However, it remains to be, it is more ambivalent than other Central Asian states. And this was also what was mentioned before. The younger generation has different experiences and expectations. I think that the pictures are really good. They show really well how strong the physical presence of the Soviet Union is. If we consider buildings, for instance, be it apartments, flats, but also statues, you can see the piping here. But it also shows that the life today intervenes in that structure. So we cannot have a simplified view of the East or Eastern Europe. And if you observe it from the outside, you see many things which you would expect also from the Soviet Union, but this also leads to a wrong conclusion that nothing has changed. So you cannot get rid of all these concrete elements. So there is a new life, there is a new context, and we also heard that people also deal with it ironically. So I think it's really great to see that. We see this superficial picture. It seems like it comes from a different time, but now it exists in a completely different context. So shifting statues around, for instance, just moving a statue 100 meters away, of course it also takes time and strength to do that, and it also took a lot of effort to build these statues, and also the renaming of streets. All the streets had the same names, and most of the time those names were kept even longer than they were kept on the street name plates. So you can still see those Soviet realities in the buildings, in the infrastructure. But there is a new reality now. Thank you so much. So I would invite everyone to travel to Kyrgyzstan and take a look at it themselves. But now we travel to the third location. This journey would actually take the longest time. We would get out in Belgrade. We would meet Peter Matic. He is 23 years old and he's a sociology student. But first we will get on the train and take a look at the first pictures of the city and get the first impressions of the town.
Ali postoji još ne mali broj kolonijalnih naroda, čije oslobođenje i nezavisnost neophodno potrebno ostvariti radi otklanjanja jednog od najkrupnijih elemenata današnje zategnutosti u svijetu i stalne opasnosti od zazivanja ratnih sukoba.
A warm welcome to you, Peter. Thank you for joining us today. Yugoslavia was a non-aligned socialist state where the leader Tito had managed to position himself between East and West. And this geopolitical orientation is also reflected in your family. And you said once that it was precisely this policy that made your existence possible. Can you explain that briefly?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me. Yes, so the point you mentioned that the Yugoslav foreign policy has directly resulted in my existence is in fact true. So as people may not know, Yugoslavia was quite a different state than the Soviet Union was. In fact, it had one of the most liberal traveling policies available. So as a result, my grandfather, who was Yugoslavian, met my grandmother in Bulgaria. And afterwards, they both went to live in Germany. So you can see the clear disparity between the Soviet system and the Yugoslav system. So that is actually, I think, a very interesting point and one that was nice to mention.
Well, and you also followed those traces. You looked for traces of the past and you took your camera with you. And we would like to take a look at one of your pictures. Maybe you also have to explain this to us. I think this picture was also taken at a very special location. Maybe you can tell us what we see here and what it means for you.
So this picture obviously does need some explaining. It was taken at an abandoned factory where I live. So I live in a part of town that was formerly a working class part of town. It was built for workers, almost an industrial zone. And as a result, there are dozens of abandoned factories nearby. This particular picture was taken at a factory called Vodoterma, which was, it basically produced water systems, etc. Not very interesting, but what is interesting is this picture. So it was taken in an office. I think it was the office of one of the managers or directors of the company. And on it, you can see a diploma that is dedicated to one of the teams within the factory. And it basically congratulates the team for a chess tournament. And as you can see on the cracked glass, the manager later decided to place another image. And I think that this picture really demonstrates, I'd say, the contrast between the bureaucracy that existed within Yugoslavia, the respect, that the status simply that diplomas and other documents had in that system, and how over the years, as a result of a change in overall state structure and policy, this became pretty much irrelevant, and how the focus changed to something else entirely.
Und die zweiten Bilder, die
Yes, thank you very much. And the second picture actually shows Tito. I think the first picture was also found in this factory. Maybe you can tell us later. And I actually am very interested in this graffiti. So do we still have this cult around Tito? Is it still present? And for how much time did you have to look to find these pictures?
Well, yes, the first picture actually was taken in the same factory as the diploma one, and here you can see, of course, a portrait of Tito, which was hanged in all basically schools or public institutions, and as noticeable in the image, it has not stood the test of time as well as Tito might have hoped. And the second image was taken in a building called Biggs, which was a print house. And it was later privatized and is now mostly a space for artists. But concerning the cult around Tito, as you say, I would say that it is now, the graffiti is mostly, of course, satirical in a way, so it is not in support of Tito, and I would say that a lot of the youth, as a result of the Yugoslav wars, there have been a lot of nationalist tendencies. So you may see graffiti like this more often, which is in contrast to the view of the older generations that have a completely different view of Tito, as I am sure is the case in many other post-socialist countries.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. I think a different experience is that after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, the Balkan region actually showed many different conflicts. There have been terrible massacres, and there were many different conflicts with neighboring states.
Drängt das dann so die sozialistische jugoslawische Erfahrung?
So the socialist Yugoslavian experience, is that not that important compared to the events that happened afterwards? What do you think? So if you look back in Serbia and take a look at the history, take a look at the country's history, what is the most important thing? Where do people stop and what do people look at?
Yes, that is a very good question. I would say that it depends I suppose, again, on the generation, as my generation, for example, has been, I mean, all of them have been greatly impacted by of course, the bloody Yugoslav dissolution of wars. But that's this. So these wars have resulted in a rise of a new type of populism, I would say, in the rise of nationalism, in the rise of policies that are sometimes more aggressive than Yugoslav ones, which is, I would suppose, quite paradoxic. But I would say that the Yugoslav experience still lives on, definitely, as most institutions present today in present-day Serbia were in fact built during the Yugoslav period. And they definitely still have an impact on people's lives. Although I would say that it is less pronounced than the ideological impact that the wars have had. This is where I would draw a line, for example. So the wars have had a purely ideological impact, and Yugoslavia has left its sort of a positive material legacy, I would suppose.
Ja, vielen Dank, Petar. Wie gesagt, auch
Thank
hier
you,
gibt
Peter.
es weitere Informationen und Bilder im
And
Internet.
you can find more pictures, more information on the
Wenn
internet.
Sie auf
Miss
Serbien
Sasse,
oder auf den Balkan heute schauen,
if we take a look at Serbia or
irgendwas übrig geblieben
the
von der
Balkans
ehemaligen
today,
Brückenfunktion zwischen Ost und West?
could we
Das ist eine schwierige Frage.
defend that bridge-building function of the past? Could we preserve it? I don't know if there was a bridge-building function or if it was permeable towards both directions. I mean, we just heard that they had liberal traveling rules, and we have older generations in Western Europe, in Southern Europe, and of course they have different perceptions of Yugoslavia or the Soviet Union. And I believe Tito understood to act towards both directions, be it economically or politically, and to tap into that free space in between. But to talk of a bridge-building function today would be window dressing. I don't believe that's the case. It could have a bridge-building function if we consider that we have different, or there were different versions of socialist models. There is no such thing as the socialist model. That's very important to remember. But we tend to think in those silos. But Peter mentioned that there are different consequences, and wars, of course, have deep consequences, and I find it difficult to see a bridge-building function in that. Of course, there are aspects of the Yugoslavian or socialist past that are still visible today, but I believe Peter could explain that so much better. The wars that this region has seen overshadows many other things, of course. There might be aspects people would like to go back to. There might be some form of nostalgia, but that has to do with the fact that people think of the time before those conflicts. And from a historical viewpoint, Tito managed to keep Yugoslavia together because of a very well thought through politics. The territories had a higher level of autonomy than what was the case in the Soviet Union, for instance. But after Tito passed away, this structure got under pressure, and that structure was difficult to sustain. During Tito's reign, people projected a lot into his personality. Think of the partisans, for instance. So he was connected to many different pictures that you can now see ironically in street graffiti, for instance. But he shouldered a huge role that no one could shoulder after his demise, and that was one of the problems. And that was a decisive factor for that dynamics. And therefore, it's difficult to think in bridge-building functions. But again, it's a term that we use. We use the term Balkans. Is it the Western Balkans, the Eastern Balkans? And they might come with certain connotations. And sometimes terms are used by another region, but not the region they pertain to. That's also something we shouldn't ignore. And we have the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, but we have the Balkans. And think about the connotations that they come along with. Now, we are getting towards the end of today's journey. Now you tried to shed light on different stops, different destinations. And along our journey, we have met many unsolved problems, topics that need to be discussed some more. But 30 years ago, a huge empire came to an end. Now, if we take a look at the countries, the regions, developments, incidents, and you say it was also inspiring, because in the news we tend to read the negative headlines about conflicts, wars. But if we approach this from a different angle, maybe there are aspects that should be discussed more often because they reflect positive developments. Yes, of course. We tend to discuss crises, conflicts, corruption whenever we go back to that region. And we paint that picture of doom. But 30 years ago, we had a different situation also in Europe. Back then, it was unimaginable to think that parts of Eastern Europe would be part of a union. And of course, the European Union came about later, but if we take a look at the political and cultural map, so much progress was made, progress that we take for granted nowadays. And of course, we should deal with individual countries or regions much more. But still, we have the countries from that region, the Balkans, from Central or Eastern Europe. They are part and parcel of the European Union. So in a relatively short period of time, they underwent a huge transformation. But that came with a cost, of course, for the population. And back then, it was unimaginable to think that this could happen in such a short time span. Not everything is perfect, of course, but these processes developed in a relatively short period of time, and that was not a mean feat. And going back to Ukraine, its integrity, its autonomy is disputed completely by Russia. The conflict that is unfolding on Ukrainian territory, the Donbas region, and that goes back to identities pertaining to ethnicity, to language, and what the Kremlin wants to achieve, that's a huge question. Ukraine must be seen as an autonomous national state. And now we have seen a development going back from that inclusiveness, and it's a very diverse country. And let me add one more thing. And this is another positive dimension that is focused on by that project, and I love that. Think about the young generations and their approach to this field, their curiosity, their lust for knowledge. They want to approach this differently. And they bring together all these different perspectives and attitudes, and they focus on it through a burning glass. And oftentimes we have different versions, and the versions just replace each other. But here we have a completely different approach, and this is what we need. We need all these different perspectives coming together without evaluating the situation, observing the situation, and be able to withstand that tension that might be created throughout the process. And that gives me reason to hope. We have these long-standing democracies, and they often fail to do that. And going back to those pictures, they catch the memory, and we see that legacies cannot fulfill an automatic function. It's often underrated. We have legacies that still prevail, that still shape, but not automatically. It always happens in a completely new context. So first you need to activate legacies, you need to be aware of legacies. That can be done by the civil society. They also can be instrumentalized by the political community, but they must not be taken for granted. And we really need to try to explain the legacies and do that thoroughly. Well, thank you so much. I would like to thank all of you. I would like to thank the participants, Ms. Sasse, Lilith, Maria, Pitar. Thank you so much for your insights. Now, if you feel inspired and if you want to delve into this topic more deeply, go to our hashtag 30 post-Soviet years. You will find different pictures, great material, all the information that we gathered for you. So check out our hashtag and the website. I also want to thank the technicians. I want to thank the interpreters supporting us today. I want to thank all spectators for watching. Take care and stay healthy. And hopefully we can travel again soon and we can really see each other face to face. Thank you so much for listening.